You don't need words to understand people. Here's why. Have you ever walked away from a conversation thinking, wait, what just happened? Maybe the person smiled and said all the right things, but something about it felt off. Like there was a second message beneath the surface, one they didn't say out loud. But somehow you sensed it. It's a strange feeling, isn't it? And it happens more often than we realize. Because in today's world, people are masters at hiding how they really feel. We live in a society where being fine is a default answer, even when everything inside is falling apart. So we smile, we nod, we say we're good, but behind that mask is a mess of emotion no one sees unless they know how to look. And that's where this video begins. Because the ability to read people, without needing them to say a word, isn't magic. It's not some superpower that only therapists or mind readers have. It's a skill that anyone can develop. And once you do, it will change every conversation you have, every relationship you're in, and every decision you make. Let me ask you this. Have you ever sensed tension in a room before anyone spoke? Have you ever met someone and, within seconds, just knew something wasn't right? Or maybe you've been on the other side, feeling misunderstood even though you said everything correctly. You were talking, but no one was really hearing you. Here's the truth. We've all been there. And the reason is simple. Most of us were never taught to pay attention to what isn't said. We were trained to listen to words. But words are just the tip of the iceberg. According to research, only 7% of communication comes from the actual words we say. The rest? It's all tone of voice, facial expressions, posture, eye contact, or lack of it. That means 93% of what we communicate is nonverbal. Think about that for a second. So if you're only listening to what people say, you're missing most of what they're actually communicating. And yet, most people still believe that reading someone accurately is about being clever, fast, persuasive. The Stoics would disagree. See, Stoic philosophy doesn't teach you to control others. It teaches you to control yourself, to quiet your ego, slow down your reactions, and look at life objectively. Why does that matter? Because once your own emotions aren't clouding your view, you can start to truly see others for who they are. You begin to notice the subtle shifts, the forced smile, the drop in someone's voice when a certain name comes up, the way they say, I'm good, but their shoulders tighten as they say it. And over time, you realize something powerful. People are always telling you the truth, just not with their words. Let me give you an example. A friend once told me she was doing fine at work, same old routine. Nothing new, but when I asked her how the last team meeting went, her eyes flicked sideways for a split second. Her fingers tapped nervously on her mug, and her tone dropped just slightly. That's all I needed to know. Her words said, I'm fine. Her body screamed, I'm not. And I didn't call her out. I didn't need to. I just stayed present, asked how I could support her, and gave her space to open up. Reading people isn't about confronting them. It's about connecting with them, without needing them to explain themselves. And let's be clear, this isn't about manipulation. It's not about using insight to get what you want. The Stoics would say that's a misuse of power. It's about awareness, clarity, presence. And the best part? You can learn this. The Stoics, people like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, lived in times filled with chaos, betrayal, war. They didn't have the luxury of guessing people's motives. They had to see clearly. And they trained themselves to observe without judgment, without bias, without emotional noise. In doing so, they developed a kind of inner freedom, one that let them move through the world with calm, with confidence, and with deep understanding. That's what's available to you, too. Because once you stop reacting and start observing, you become harder to fool, easier to trust, and infinitely more grounded. You stop being thrown off by people's moods. You stop mistaking charm for sincerity. You stop letting someone else's silence make you spiral. Instead, you learn to notice, to hold space, to truly listen, not just to the words, but to the pauses between them, the tone beneath them, the tension behind them. And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. You walk into meetings and sense who's on board and who's checked out, without needing a single word. You talk to friends and know when something's wrong, even if they say everything's fine. You begin to lead, not by commanding, but by understanding. So, If you've ever felt confused by people, misled by words, or unsure of where you stand with someone, this is your chance to shift that. Because the art of reading people without words isn't just about seeing them. It's about seeing clearly, so you can choose your next move from a place of truth, not emotion. And in a world filled with noise, that kind of calm awareness? It's rare, it's powerful, and it just might be your greatest advantage. Let's dive in. The art of seeing clearly, without judgment. Let me tell you something that might surprise you. When it comes to communication, words are barely scratching the surface. In fact, studies show that only 7% of what we communicate comes from the actual words we use. The other 93%? It's everything else: tone of voice, facial expressions, body posture, eye movement, even silence. Think about that. If you only focus on what people say, you're missing most of what they're actually trying to tell you. And that's exactly why the ability to observe, not judge, not assume, just observe, is one of the most underrated life skills you can build. And it's one that the Stoics mastered long before modern psychology ever gave it a name. Let's take a moment to rewind to something simple, something you've probably seen 1,000 times. You're in a meeting. Your boss says, "I don't have any issues with this proposal." Sounds good, right? But if you're paying attention, you notice their eyes narrow slightly. Their fingers are twirling a pen on the table. Their voice slows down just a little too much. That's not confidence. That's hesitation, maybe even disapproval. So which version of the truth are you going to listen to? The 7% or the 93%? Now, here's the catch. Most people don't know how to observe without projecting their own emotions, fears, or assumptions onto what they see. Someone crosses their arms in a conversation and suddenly we think, they're defensive. They're closed off. But maybe, they're just cold. Or maybe it's simply how they sit. The Stoics would tell you, stop jumping to conclusions. Start recording reality like a scientist. That means when someone frowns during your presentation, don't immediately spiral into, "They hate my idea." Just note, they frowned. That's it. Observation is not interpretation. And that's the difference between seeing the world as it is, and seeing it through your own emotional filter. I remember once working with someone who always paused before responding in meetings. At first, I thought he was hesitant or unsure. But after a while, I realized something. That pause wasn't about insecurity, it was about discipline. He refused to speak until he had something clear and valuable to say. That experience taught me to stop labeling people too quickly, to give myself time to understand the why behind the behavior. And that leads us to a powerful tool that very few people use: understanding someone's baseline. A baseline is simply how someone behaves when they're calm, relaxed, and being themselves. Some people speak fast. Some always crack a joke after a serious comment. Some naturally fidget, even when they're totally at ease. When you know someone's baseline, you can recognize the subtle moments when something shifts, when stress shows up, or when they're hiding something. But if you don't know their baseline, you're left guessing, and those guesses are often wrong. Let me give you an example. If someone normally talks fast and suddenly starts speaking slowly, that might mean they're carefully choosing their words. Or maybe they're uncomfortable. But if someone normally speaks slowly, that same behavior means nothing. Without a baseline, context disappears. And without context, you'll always be misreading people. But there's another ingredient we need to add here, something that keeps your observation from turning cold or mechanical. Empathy. Now, I'm not talking about emotional entanglement. The Stoics weren't about getting swept up in other people's feelings. But they did believe in clarity through compassion. It's the ability to ask yourself, if I were them right now, what might I be feeling? Not to pity, not to rescue, just to understand. When you combine empathy with clear observation, you create a kind of X-ray vision for human behavior. You start seeing the emotional layers behind a quiet sigh, or a twitch in someone's voice when a certain subject comes up. You begin to realize that people aren't random. Most behavior has a reason. And when you look closely enough, that reason starts to reveal itself, slowly, quietly, but honestly. Let's make this even more practical. The next time you're in a conversation, try this. Stop focusing so hard on what to say next. Instead, notice, how are they sitting? Are their shoulders tense? Is their voice steady or shaky? Do their eyes follow you, or are they looking away? And most importantly, does any of this deviate from their usual behavior? This isn't about being a human lie detector. It's about learning how to see clearly, without ego, without fear, and without the need to be right. Because the truth is, most of us aren't trained to observe. We're trained to react, to judge, to defend, to assume. And in doing so, we miss the quiet signals people are constantly giving us. Signals that say, I'm overwhelmed, I'm scared, I don't trust you yet. Or sometimes, I wish someone would just listen. Here's what the Stoics understood. We can't control how others behave. But we can train ourselves to see clearly, to respond wisely, and to stay grounded no matter what someone else is projecting. And that starts with observation. Unbiased, honest, humble observation. So if you want to deepen your relationships, lead more effectively, avoid being manipulated, and build true emotional intelligence, start here. Start watching, quietly, patiently, like a scientist of human nature. Because the more clearly you see others, the more wisely you'll navigate your life. And that kind of vision? It's a form of freedom. Let's keep going. How to train the skill of reading people without saying a word. Let's get something straight. The ability to read people, really read them, is not a talent you're born with. It's not a gift reserved for therapists, detectives, or some emotionally advanced elite. It's a skill, just like playing guitar or learning a language. And like any skill, it can be trained, deliberately, thoughtfully, quietly. If you've ever wished you could pick up on the things people don't say, the hesitation behind their words, the real meaning behind a smile, the discomfort behind a polite nod, then this is your starting point. Because reading people isn't about being clever. It's about being present, and in a noisy, distracted world, presence is rare, which makes it powerful. So, how do you train this? How do you sharpen your senses so that you're not guessing what someone feels, you just see it? Let me walk you through 3 simple but incredibly effective exercises. You don't need books. You don't need degrees. You just need your attention. Exercise 1. People watching with purpose. Find a coffee shop, a park bench, an airport terminal, anywhere people move through naturally. And then, just sit. Not with your phone, not with music in your ears. Just sit and observe. Watch how people walk. Who's rushing? Who's dragging their feet? Who's hunched over like they're carrying invisible weight? Who keeps checking their phone like they're waiting for something or someone? Look at body posture. Look at where their eyes go. Look at how their shoulders sit. Are they tight or relaxed? You're not here to judge. You're not here to create stories. You're here to see. That woman pacing with her hands buried in her coat pockets. What's her emotional state? That man laughing loudly on the phone. Does it sound joyful or forced? The key here is detachment. You're not trying to guess someone's life story. You're training your eyes to notice patterns, to pick up on tension, rhythm, energy. Stoics believed in observing without judgment, like a scientist, or better yet, like a mirror, clear, still, reflective, not reactive. Try doing this once a week. 15 minutes. That's all. Over time, you'll be shocked at how much more you see in daily life. And how often you were missing it before. Exercise 2. Watch your favorite movie, with the sound off. This one is fun and surprisingly powerful. Pick a film you've already seen, something you enjoy. Mute the sound. No subtitles, just visuals. Now, pay attention to the characters. Watch their facial expressions, their gestures, their posture, how they turn away when something gets uncomfortable, how they lean in when something matters. You'll notice things you missed the first time. The way someone fidgets during an argument, how someone avoids eye contact after lying, how their body stiffens just before delivering bad news. You'll begin to realize, dialogue often distracts us from the real emotion. And once your eyes are trained to spot the tension, the vulnerability, the concealed frustration, even without a single word, you'll carry that same skill into real life. Because real people, just like movie characters, leak emotion through their bodies before they ever open their mouths. Exercise 3. After each conversation, reflect, but not on what was said. Here's where it gets personal. After your next conversation, whether it's with a colleague, a friend, your partner, take a moment. Quietly ask yourself, what did I notice beyond their words? How was their tone? Did their energy rise or drop at certain moments? Did they fidget, cross their arms, look away? Did they say they were okay, but something felt off? You don't have to write an essay. A few mental notes are enough. Over time, this will sharpen your intuition, not in a mystical way, but in a practical, grounded, Stoic sense. You'll stop taking people's words at face value. You'll start noticing the difference between what someone says and what they're actually showing you. Now, here's the beautiful part of all this. You don't need hours of practice. You don't need to analyze every gesture in real time. Because when done consistently, these exercises change the way you see. It becomes automatic, just like learning to drive. At first, you're overwhelmed by mirrors, pedals, signs, but eventually, your body knows, your mind anticipates, it becomes effortless. Same with observation. You begin to pick up on emotional shifts in conversations without even thinking. You sense hesitation before someone expresses doubt. You notice a colleague's energy is off before the meeting even begins. And people will start to feel like you understand them, even when they can't explain themselves. Because what you're reading is not just behavior. You're reading emotion, energy, human nature. But remember this, you're not learning this to control people. You're learning it to connect, with clarity and compassion. The Stoics were never interested in manipulation. Their goal was to see life as it is, not as they feared or hoped it would be. And that includes people. They understood that when you observe the world clearly, without ego or urgency, you become unshakable, not cold, not distant, but steady. So if you're tired of misreading people, if you want to stop being caught off guard by what someone really meant, if you're ready to build the kind of calm presence that people naturally trust, then start training your eyes, your ears, your awareness. Start noticing what most people miss. Because once you learn to see without needing words, you'll begin to understand without needing explanations. And that, right there, is where true emotional intelligence begins. Let's keep going. Why people act the way they do, and what it really means. Have you ever looked at someone's behavior and thought, what's wrong with them? They overreact to small things. They pull away when you try to get close. They lash out, or shut down. And no matter how much you try to make sense of it, it just seems irrational. But here's the truth, people don't act without reason. Human behavior is never random. Beneath every cold stare, every sharp comment, every awkward silence, there's a story, a cause, a need that hasn't been met, or a wound that hasn't healed. And if you want to master the art of reading people, not just what they do, but why they do it, then you need to start thinking like a Stoic. Calm, curious, unshaken. Because while most people judge what they see on the surface, the Stoic learns to look deeper. Let's start with something fundamental. Most of the time, what looks like bad behavior is really just pain in disguise. The person who's always trying to control everything, they might be terrified of uncertainty. The one who constantly brags could be battling insecurity they've never admitted. And the one who always plays it cool, never gets too close, never shares too much, that might be someone who learned early on that vulnerability equals danger. Here's what you need to remember. Most people are not trying to be difficult. They're just trying to survive the world with the tools they've picked up along the way. There's a powerful framework that helps explain this. You might have heard of it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the very base of the pyramid is survival, food, water, safety. Then come things like belonging, self-esteem, and finally, self-actualization, becoming your best self. But here's the catch. If someone is stuck at the bottom, worried about money, job security, emotional safety, they're not going to act like a philosopher. They're not thinking about meaning, purpose, or inner peace. They're just trying to get through the day. So when someone lies, withdraws, avoids responsibility, maybe they're not selfish. Maybe they're scared. When someone seems greedy, maybe they're not evil. Maybe they've never known what security feels like. Once you start looking at behavior through this lens, you stop taking things so personally, and start responding with clarity. But there's another layer, defense mechanisms. These are the mind's way of protecting itself from pain, sometimes at the cost of truth. Let's say someone keeps making jokes whenever things get serious. On the surface, They're just funny, but underneath, they might be terrified of rejection. And humor is how they avoid intimacy. Or take the person who constantly criticizes others. They might not actually think they're better than everyone. More likely, they're projecting their own self-doubt onto everyone around them. The mind is clever. It bends perception to avoid what hurts. That's why denial, projection, avoidance, they're not just excuses. They're strategies, unconscious ones. And if you don't recognize them, you'll end up frustrated, confused, or worse, feeling like someone's behavior is about you, when it's really about them. Let me tell you a story. A friend of mine, let's call him Dave, had a coworker who always undermined him in meetings. Subtle jabs, passive-aggressive comments, nothing overt, but enough to create tension. At first, Dave got angry. He thought, this guy has it out for me. But one day, he stayed back after work and just asked, hey, is everything okay between us? What came out surprised him. The coworker admitted that he felt threatened by Dave's ideas and feared being left behind. It wasn't personal, it was fear, insecurity, survival instinct. And that moment changed everything. Not because Dave excused the behavior, but because he finally understood it. That's what the Stoics meant when they said, don't be disturbed by what others do. Understand why they do it. So here's the question. When you meet someone who acts in a way that confuses you, can you pause before you react? Can you ask yourself, what pain might this person be carrying? What need is going unmet? What fear could be behind this mask? You don't need to psychoanalyze them. You just need to stay awake, curious, open to the possibility that their actions are the result of something deeper. When you see someone overreact to a small criticism, ask, is this really about me, or is it an old wound being reopened? When someone ghosts you, maybe it's not about rejection. Maybe they've never learned how to communicate discomfort. This doesn't mean you tolerate bad behavior. Stoicism doesn't teach us to become emotional punching bags. But it does teach us to see clearly, to respond with reason instead of resentment, to hold compassion without losing our boundaries. And in doing so, we free ourselves from one of life's most common traps, taking everything personally. Because at the end of the day, everyone you meet is fighting battles you can't see. Everyone carries pain they rarely talk about. And when you learn to read not just the behavior, but the motivation behind it, you become a rare kind of person. Calm, centered, perceptive, the kind of person who sees the storm but doesn't get caught in it. So the next time someone's behavior confuses or hurts you, try this. Don't react. Observe. Ask yourself, what might be behind this? What fear, pain, or need is driving them? You may not get an answer right away, but you'll start to see people differently. And most importantly, you'll stop letting their pain become your problem. That's the kind of emotional clarity the Stoics lived by. And it's the kind of clarity that sets you free. Let's keep going. Reading body language and group dynamics, what people reveal without realizing it. Let me ask you something simple. Have you ever had a conversation where someone said all the right words, but something didn't sit right? They smiled, agreed, maybe even laughed at your joke, but their eyes darted to the door. Their fingers tapped anxiously on the table, or their posture shifted ever so slightly away from you. That's because our bodies speak, even when our mouths don't. In fact, the body often tells the truth before the person even knows they're lying to themselves. Learning to read body language is not about becoming a human lie detector. It's about becoming more aware, more tuned in to what people are really communicating, consciously or not. And when you combine this with group dynamics, how people behave with each other, not just with you, you start to see entire conversations playing out silently, beneath the surface. That's what we're diving into today. Let's start small. The micro clues. What the body whispers. You don't need a dramatic gesture to read someone. In fact, the most honest signals are often the smallest ones. A clenched jaw when discussing a partner. A sudden blink rate increase when asked about work. A mouth tightening into a line when someone's hiding disappointment. A hand suddenly leaving the table during a tense moment. You don't need to decode every twitch like Sherlock Holmes. But you do need to learn to notice changes from someone's baseline. That's the golden rule. If someone usually gestures freely and suddenly freezes during a certain topic, that's a signal. If someone's voice is warm and steady, then suddenly drops into monotone. That's a shift. And that shift matters more than any textbook definition of what crossed arms or fidgeting is supposed to mean. The Stoics would remind us, don't rush to interpret. Just observe, calmly, objectively, let the body speak, and trust that your mind, when quiet, will pick up what matters. The eyes say more than the mouth. Here's something powerful. The eyes never lie for long. They may not scream, but they whisper truths constantly. Rapid blinking often indicates stress. Looking up and to the left? Recalling a memory. Up and to the right? Possibly imagining, or even fabricating. Avoiding eye contact doesn't always mean dishonesty. Sometimes it means discomfort. Sometimes it means shame. The key is to ask yourself, is this normal for them? Or is this a shift? I once watched a job interview where the candidate spoke fluently and confidently, until the interviewer mentioned teamwork. At that moment, the candidate's lips pressed together tightly. Their eyes dropped for a split second, and they shifted in their seat. That tiny moment said more than any answer they gave. Not because they were lying, but because something about that word carried emotional weight. Pay attention to those tiny shifts. That's where people accidentally reveal their truth. Hands don't lie either. Open palms usually signal openness and honesty. Clenched fists, rubbing the neck, or gripping objects tightly, these all suggest stress or withheld emotion. Next time you're in a high-pressure situation, watch what people do with their hands. Most people don't realize how revealing their fidgeting is. The body will try to self-soothe in small ways, touching their face, adjusting their collar, playing with their phone, not because they're distracted, but because they're subconsciously trying to regain emotional control. Even the breath gives it away. Someone who inhales deeply but subtly before speaking is often bracing for emotional impact. Short, shallow breathing usually signals anxiety. A held breath might mean someone's waiting for a reaction and hoping it won't hurt. These aren't random patterns, they're signals. And when you see them clearly, you stop having to guess what's going on inside someone's head, because their body already told you. Reading the room. Group dynamics in action. But there's something even more powerful than reading individuals, and that's reading groups. Have you ever been in a meeting and noticed that one person never speaks, but everyone glances their way when it's time to decide? That's not accidental. That's unspoken hierarchy. In every group, there are subtle cues about who leads, who follows, who's trusted, who's ignored, and you don't need a formal title to spot this. Watch who leans in when someone talks. Watch who people look at after a big question is asked. Watch who the laughter follows, or who consistently gets cut off. Power doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it just receives quiet attention. I once sat in on a team presentation where the official leader did all the talking, but every time she paused, the room looked to someone else sitting quietly at the end of the table. That person never said much, but it was clear. She held the real influence. If you're only listening to the words, you'll miss all of that. But if you observe the body language, the eye contact, the direction of energy, you'll start to map the social structure instantly. Presence over performance. Here's the deeper point. Reading body language and group dynamics isn't about analyzing people like a puzzle. It's about presence. When you're fully present, fully tuned in, you stop being distracted by what you want to hear, and start noticing what's actually happening. And that presence changes everything. It helps you avoid misunderstandings. It builds deeper trust. It keeps you grounded when others are trying to mask their intentions. The Stoics believed that clarity comes from stillness, and that stillness begins in the mind. When you're not busy reacting, performing, or trying to impress, you finally begin to see others as they are. And that's what reading people is really about. Not decoding, not manipulating, just noticing, quietly, clearly, from a place of calm awareness. So the next time you sit across from someone, at work, at home, or even in silence, pay attention. Not just to their words, but to their breath, to the shift in posture, to the moment they stop moving, to the way others around them respond, without realizing it. Because people are always communicating. Some just don't use words. Let's keep going. Listening to what isn't said, the real art of understanding people. There's a skill so rare, so subtle, that most people never fully develop it. It's not about speaking well. It's not about asking the right questions. It's about listening, not just to words, but to what lies beneath them, around them, and most importantly, what's missing. Because sometimes, the most honest thing a person says is what they never say at all. Let's start with something that happens all the time, but rarely gets noticed. You're in a conversation. Someone pauses before answering, not the kind of pause that shows thoughtfulness, but a hesitation. A flicker of internal conflict. Or they respond with words, but their eyes briefly dart away. They smile, but their face doesn't quite match. Something's off. Those are the moments when truth is hiding, not behind loud statements, but in subtle signals. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss everything. The language of silence. Silence is never empty. Sometimes it screams. Sometimes it pleads. Sometimes it hides. When someone suddenly goes quiet after a topic is brought up, when their voice trails off at the end of a sentence, when they speak less the more the conversation matters, don't rush to fill the space. Let the silence speak. Stoics taught us that silence is a form of strength, but it's also a window. People often fall silent not because they have nothing to say, but because what they want to say feels dangerous. So ask yourself, what just changed? What was said before the pause? What emotion surfaced? When you tune into these transitions, the breath that gets held, the shift in tone, the way someone stares into their coffee cup like it suddenly became interesting, you begin to read the emotional landscape. Not just the words, the power of micro-expressions. There's a whole universe that lives in the face, and most of it flashes by in less than a second. These are called micro-expressions, tiny facial movements that reflect a person's true emotions. Often before they even know what they're feeling. A tightening around the eyes. A flash of disgust before a smile is forced into place. A single raised eyebrow during a compliment. These aren't tricks or tells. They're honest, raw, and once you learn to see them, they'll change the way you understand people forever. I remember once watching a friend share good news. She was smiling, telling us about a promotion, but for a split second, I saw her jaw tighten and her eyes look downward. That's not joy. That's anxiety, maybe pressure, maybe doubt about what that promotion really meant for her life. She didn't need to say anything else. I already understood what was behind the curtain. When we learn to observe without judgment, we earn the right to understand others more deeply. When words don't match, incongruence. One of the clearest signs that someone isn't being fully honest, with you or with themselves, is incongruence. That's when their words say one thing, but their tone, body, or energy say another. It might sound like, I'm fine, but their voice is flat. Their eyes are glazed. Their shoulders are slumped. Yeah, I'm really excited about this, but there's no life in their face. No upward lift in the voice. No spark. When someone uses vague, abstract language, it's whatever. I don't know. I guess it's cool. They're usually avoiding a deeper truth, especially if they normally speak with precision. Here's where the Stoic in you needs to step forward. Don't confront. Don't accuse. Just notice. Ask yourself, why is this person suddenly distant? Why do they sound disconnected from their own story? You're not here to call them out. You're here to understand. What are they afraid to say? Most people are not lying to you. They're lying to themselves. Not out of malice, but because the truth feels too heavy, too risky, or too unfamiliar. And when the truth is dangerous, silence becomes armor. This is why the best listeners in the world aren't the ones who ask the most questions. They're the ones who see what isn't being said and respect it. They don't push. They don't pry. They wait. And in that space, trust begins to grow. And eventually, the person who was once silent begins to speak. Not because they were forced, but because they finally feel safe to. Practical reflection. Try this today. After your next conversation, take 30 seconds. Quietly ask yourself, what wasn't said? Was there a topic they avoided? Did their body agree with their words? Was there a shift in energy when a name or idea came up? The more you do this, the more fluent you become in the unspoken. And as you become fluent, people will feel something different around you. They won't be able to explain it, but they'll trust you more. Because they'll feel seen, understood, without judgment. And that is rare. A Stoic's advantage. In a world obsessed with noise, fast talk, and shallow interactions, Being able to hear what isn't said gives you a kind of quiet power. You don't react, you respond. You don't assume, you observe. You don't rush to conclusions, you allow truth to emerge. And when you develop this kind of awareness, you become the person people come to when they need clarity. Not because you solve their problems, but because you listen like no one else does. The Stoics believed that wisdom begins with perception, not just of the world, but of people. And when you learn to listen between the lines, beneath the words, and through the silences, you start to see people not as they pretend to be, but as they truly are. So today, be still, be open, and listen closely, because what they don't say might be the most important thing of all. Let's keep going. How to spot insincerity, the quiet power of seeing who's real. Let's face it, most people aren't brave enough to be honest. They won't tell you directly that they're no longer interested. They won't say they're avoiding you. They won't admit that their yes is actually a silent no. Instead, they nod politely, smile vaguely, or throw out half-hearted phrases like, "Let's catch up soon." But deep down, they've already left the room. And if you're not paying attention, you'll waste your time chasing ghosts, people who were never really present in the first place. So today, let's talk about how to spot insincerity, not by what people say, but by how they behave when no one is watching, when there's nothing left to gain, when silence becomes more telling than any sweet word. Because when you learn to see through politeness, you protect your peace, you conserve your energy, you stop begging for honesty, and start reading between the lines. Not everyone has the courage to say, no. Let's get one thing clear. Many people are terrified of conflict. They don't want to disappoint you. They don't want to look like the bad guy. And so, instead of saying, "I'm not interested," they say, "I've just been really busy, sorry. I forgot to reply." Yeah, we should totally do that sometime. But these aren't real answers. They're escape hatches, soft landings for hard truths. And the problem isn't just them, it's us. Because we want to believe. We want to give the benefit of the doubt. So we keep reaching out. Keep waiting. Keep justifying behavior that, if we were honest, is clearly one-sided. The Stoics would ask, are you seeing things as they are? Or as you wish them to be? That's the line that separates wisdom from wishful thinking. The body knows first. Words may lie, but the body almost never does. Fake agreement shows up in subtle ways. A smile that doesn't reach the eyes. A delayed reaction when you share good news. An awkward silence after you suggest plans. A slight lean away. A glance at their phone. A hand that fidgets nervously. These aren't proof that someone's insincere, but they're clues. And the more you observe calmly, without judgment, the more patterns you'll begin to recognize. People who are truly engaged lean in. They ask questions. Their energy is present, even in silence. There's warmth. But when someone's not sincere, everything feels hollow, like they're playing a role they've already outgrown. If you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling more confused than connected, that's your intuition whispering. Something's off. Listen to it. The test of interest. Stop reaching out. Here's one of the simplest, most powerful tests you can run. Stop initiating. Stop texting first. Stop following up. Stop asking how they're doing. Just stop. And then, wait. If they value you, they'll notice your absence. They'll reach out. Maybe not immediately, but soon enough. If they don't, that's your answer. No drama. No guessing. Just clarity. This isn't about playing games, it's about restoring balance. It's about letting actions speak louder than rehearsed politeness. A Stoic never begs for attention. They observe reality, accept what is, and move forward with grace. Why this hurts, and why you must still do it. Recognizing insincerity hurts, especially when it comes from people you care about. But you know what hurts more? Continuing to invest your energy into a relationship that's already withered at the root. The truth is, most people won't give you closure. You have to give it to yourself. And the way to do that isn't through angry confrontations or passive-aggressive texts. It's by looking at the facts. Who reaches out when you go quiet? Who remembers the small things? Who shows up without needing reminders? If someone only responds when it's convenient, they're not invested. They're just available. That's a tough pill to swallow. But it's also one of the most freeing realizations you'll ever have. How Stoics deal with insincere people. The Stoics didn't teach us to cut people off in bitterness. They taught us to see clearly and act accordingly. If someone's not genuine, don't resent them. Just adjust your expectations. You don't need to burn bridges. You just stop crossing them alone. Instead of wasting your time decoding mixed signals, step back and ask, what are they consistently showing me? What do their patterns say? Because intention is invisible, but patterns? They're undeniable. And once you start living by what people do, not what they promise, you unlock a new kind of emotional freedom. A final thought. You're not too much, they're just not enough. Sometimes, we internalize someone's insincerity as a reflection of our own worth. We think, maybe I'm too intense, too deep, too emotional. But the truth is, you're not too much. They're just not the right people for your kind of depth. The right people won't make you second-guess your presence. They won't hide behind polite excuses. They'll show up, fully, honestly, until then. Be like a Stoic. Observe, adjust, let go without bitterness, and walk forward with quiet strength. Because when you stop chasing what's fake, you make space for what's real. Let's keep going. How to spot people who don't truly support you, even if they seem friendly. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had someone in your life who smiles when you're around? Laughs at your jokes, maybe even calls you brother or sister. But something in your gut whispers, they're not really for you? They don't openly criticize, they don't argue, but they also never challenge you, never correct you, never ask about what truly matters to you. It's the subtle disconnection that's hard to explain, but easy to feel. Today, we're talking about a type of person that's far more dangerous than an enemy, the polite pretender. The one who seems like a supporter, but quietly hopes you don't rise too far. Spotting this kind of person isn't about paranoia, it's about wisdom. It's about knowing who actually adds to your life, and who just hovers on the sidelines. Clapping with a forced smile. Not all friendliness is support. We live in a culture that confuses niceness with genuine support. But they're not the same. Some people are polite because they don't want conflict. Some are warm because it keeps them close enough to monitor you. And some pretend to root for you, until your success starts making them uncomfortable. So how do you tell the difference? You stop listening to their tone, and start observing their actions. Here's the truth. Real support isn't loud, but it is consistent. And when someone truly supports you, it shows up in 6 key ways. Let's break them down. The 6 markers of real support. 1. They keep your secrets safe if you share something vulnerable with them. It doesn't become gossip. They protect it like it's their own. 2. They celebrate your success. Without turning it into a competition, they don't downplay your wins. They don't switch the subject. They genuinely smile when you grow. No awkward energy. No backhanded compliments. 3. They help without hesitation. You don't have to beg. You don't feel guilty asking. They don't keep score. When you need them, they show up, even if it's inconvenient. 4. They're honest with you. Even when it's uncomfortable, they correct you when you're off course. They offer feedback with care, not criticism. They want you to be better, not just feel better. 5. They include you in their good moments when something beautiful happens in their life. You're one of the first people they tell. You're not just useful when they're down, you're welcome when they're flying high. 6. They don't vanish when the spotlight's not on you. They're still around when life is quiet. When you're not winning. When there's no story to tell. They stay, quietly, steadily. Now, ask yourself, who in your life fits that list? And more importantly, who doesn't? The subtle red flags of non-supportive people. People who don't genuinely support you will often avoid uncomfortable truths. They won't give you feedback, even when you clearly need it. Why? Because real support takes effort. And it requires vulnerability, from both sides. They'll avoid deep topics. They'll sidestep your growth. They'll change the subject when things get meaningful. Or worse, they'll pretend to agree with you while secretly disengaging. They nod, they smile, but they don't contribute. If someone constantly avoids the hard conversations, ask yourself, are they protecting your feelings? Or their own comfort? Stoicism teaches us that friendship without truth is just convenience. You don't need to confront, you need to categorize. Here's the most empowering part. You don't need to cut people off. You don't need a dramatic, "I'm done with you" moment. You just need to place them in the right category in your life. Think of your relationships like concentric circles. The inner circle is sacred, reserved for the few who truly see you, challenge you, support you. These are your people. The middle circle is neutral. You're friendly, respectful, but not emotionally dependent. The outer circle is distant. You wish them well, but they don't shape your direction. The mistake most people make? They let everyone into the inner circle, and then they wonder why they feel betrayed, unseen, or unsupported. Your peace isn't about who you remove, it's about who you reposition. Let their behavior decide where they belong. No need for resentment, just quiet adjustment. Final thought. Choose depth over proximity. Here's what I've learned. Just because someone is always around doesn't mean they're with you. Time spent doesn't equal loyalty. And some people are only present to witness your progress, not to contribute to it. So pay attention. Don't just ask, "Are they nice to me?" Ask, "Do they invest in me? Do they show up with real energy? Or just presence? Do they root for your growth, even when it surpasses theirs?" Because the people who truly support you, they'll correct you when you're wrong. They'll cheer when you win. They'll stay when things get quiet. And they'll never be threatened by your light. And when you find those people, hold them close. Let's keep going. The silent force. Why true influence requires no words. Think of the most powerful person you've ever met. Not the loudest, not the most charming, not the one who dominated the room with flashy charisma. I mean the one who didn't need to say much, but when they walked in, the energy shifted, the room settled, people listened, even before they spoke. That's not magic, that's presence. And today, we're talking about a power that's rarely taught, but deeply felt. Quiet influence. The kind that flows not from noise, but from stillness. Calm changes the temperature of a room. You've probably felt it before. You're in a tense meeting. Everyone's on edge, voices are rising, ideas are clashing, and then, someone walks in. Calm, collected, they sit, say nothing. But somehow, the air gets lighter, the chaos softens, the tone shifts. How? Because emotional energy is contagious. And calm is the most stabilizing force in any room. We tend to think that influence requires control, volume, or persuasion, but often, your greatest impact comes from how centered you remain when everyone else is spiraling. It's not about having the last word. It's about being anchored while others drift. Presence over performance. The world is full of people performing, trying to impress, trying to be clever, trying to win the room with witty lines or dominant energy. But true connection doesn't come from how well you speak. It comes from how deeply you're there. When someone feels seen, not judged, heard, not fixed, safe, not analyzed, that's when trust forms. That's when influence begins. Because real presence isn't about being interesting, it's about being interested. When you're truly present, you're not waiting to talk. You're not scanning the room. You're with the person, fully, without an agenda. And that kind of presence is rare. It cuts through the noise of modern life like a clear note in a crowded symphony. Stillness signals strength. Here's the secret Stoics understood. The person who doesn't need to prove anything holds all the power. They're not pulled by emotion, not reactive to drama, not chasing approval. And in that stillness, people feel something ancient, safety. We are hardwired to trust what's calm. Because calm says, "I've seen worse than this. I can hold space for this moment. You're safe here." Whether you're leading a team, raising a child, or helping a friend through crisis, your stillness is often more valuable than any advice you could give. True connection doesn't require convincing. Think about the last time someone really got you. Did they say the perfect words? Or did they just sit with you, without trying to fix you? It's easy to assume that influence comes from eloquence, that we need clever logic or motivational quotes to reach someone. But often, all people really want is to feel safe to be themselves, free from judgment, understood without explanation. And you don't create that by talking more. You create it by being present, by listening, observing, and holding space with sincerity. As Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is to be unlike the one who caused the injury." Likewise, the best influence is to embody what the world is missing: calm, depth, presence. The paradox of influence. You gain it by letting go of it. Here's the paradox no one tells you. The more you try to influence people, the less they trust you. The more you try to convince, the more they resist. But when you drop the need to impress and instead bring quiet, authentic presence, people naturally begin to shift around you. Why? Because you're no longer trying to control them. You're just being real, and in a world of performers, that's the most magnetic thing you can do. Practice. Be the still point today. Here's a challenge. In your next conversation, pause before responding. In your next disagreement, focus on staying grounded, not winning. When you feel the urge to fix, explain, or argue, just stay present. See what happens when you become the still point in a spinning world. Final reflection. Quiet isn't weak. It's what people remember. When the meeting ends, when the crowd leaves, when the noise dies down, what lingers isn't what was said loudly. It's how someone made you feel. It's who remained calm, who made space, who saw you. So if you've ever felt like you don't shine as brightly as others, remember, light doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Your presence, your stillness, your sincere attention, that's your influence. It doesn't demand, it draws in. It doesn't argue, it reveals truth. It doesn't dominate, it calms, holds, transforms. And that is the kind of power this noisy world desperately needs more of. Let's keep going.